All right, welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Matthias Omatola, a.k.a. Major VFX, here at the Maxon booth at NAB New York, accompanied by some of the world's most amazing artists showcasing how they use Cinema 4D and the rest of the Maxon One suite to create some of the most beautiful things you see on screen. So up next, I don't want to take any time because this guy has a lot to show. Andrew Hess, let's give him a big round of applause.
Thanks, everybody. Cool. So just first of all, I want to say thanks to Maxon for having me here for this. I get a lot out of these myself, so being asked to give back to the community and do one is very cool. And so thanks for that. And thanks for everybody joining and on the live stream. Cool. So I'm Andrew Hess. I'm a motion art director in New York here. And I like to say I'm in a long-term relationship with design, direction, motion, and 3D. And what I mean by that is just that I understand this is like sort of a lifelong career where you're always learning and pushing yourself and picking up new skills and directing them back towards these disciplines. And I love that about it. I love that it's fun to play and essentially it feels like play, and that's what we get to do for a living. So I'll try to show some of the ways I do that. Like I said, based in New York City. I've been in the motion design industry for over 13 years, and I started out doing motion in the interactive field, and when Flash wasn't a thing, it was dating myself a little bit there, but when Flash wasn't a thing, I was like, it's time to move completely into motion, because ultimately, if what I was designing wasn't going to animate, I just felt like I wasn't into that final result. So for the last 5 years, I've been freelancing around New York City, a couple other shops in LA. Been getting to do some really cool work in that space and really enjoying that. This is where I'll throw the stuff up at the end, but this is the main place you can find all my work at andrewhess.com and on my Instagram. And I just wanted to show like a swatch of work kind of in lieu of a reel. So some of the things that I've worked on more recently that I'm super proud of, I've worked with Method Studios on these Uncharted and movie titles, got to art direct like the entire animation of the thing and bring really a very cool set of design frames together that a creative director had worked out by the name of Ivan. And I've done some cool things with the Mill, like a Sunday Night Football open promo and some futuristic stuff and some character rigging stuff on Netflix films that aired not too long ago, a couple of years ago, with these fine shops. And prior to going freelance, I worked at a company called Stoked, and I did a lot of really cool brand and campaign work and some things that got 3D printed, and I got to do a whole project where my 3D designs got printed out and created into these bigger sculptures by this other shop. That was a whole thing, and I think this work, even though it's old, is still worth showing. Some of the most formative work of the early parts of my career were done here. Most of the stuff, I don't think any of this is in Redshift, actually. So it was all like standard physical days. But I think it's just important to remember where we came from, so that's why I show it. And then the other end of everything I'm doing to kind of stay focused in these disciplines and grow my long-term relationship with them is my experimental and my play and my design projects I do on the side. And I have a lot of interests outside of this space that I try to bring into it. I'm like always wildly interested in patterns in nature and bringing that into 3D, and how can you do painting things with vertex maps, things that seem organic, and all of these kind of things. I'm obviously interested in FUI, like every other motion designer in the world. Particle work, all of these things just are some of the places that I play around in, some of this kind of like sculptural things and paint effects, all in Cinema, all in tools and available in Cinema. That's my main programs. I often use Insidium's X-particle systems for anything that's this kind of particle world, but it still all plays out within the Cinema world. So what I want to talk to you about today, I want to talk about concrete construction and destruction, and I want to talk about doing it in Cinema 4D specifically with the volume builder, fields, and Redshift. And I'm going to try to show it in these three projects. This first one is a set of pitch frames and a motion test that I did I'll get into what that was all about, and this is sort of about how I art directed the destruction of this concrete surface and all these elements, and then art directing construction in this sculptural kind of project that I did that was like an experimental project that I just sort of wanted to see if I could do it. And if we have time at the end, I have a really quick example of how you can take any model. This is a Quixel model, apply some of these effects we'll talk about, a little MoGraph, like rebarb setup, and get unique models on top of that, just to kind of open up what's available out there. All right, cool. So let's get into this first one. So this is focused on the destructive elements of this, how I got this controllable, procedural cracking surface into the body of this concrete structure. And what this is a set of design frames from a pitch that I was doing with Method Studios with a racing client. And for the specific racing client, their ask was to capture all the mood and the drama of a crash and the chaos and all of these things. So in a way, but also you have it be a tool set to play random interstitials, like whatever this could say. In this case, I used high speed and impact as like the setup. This would be, racer names or whatever element of the race, and also a way to showcase the various tracks that we're going to play throughout the season. So conceptually, they wanted us to focus in those areas, and I kind of thought about, okay, as I'm gathering things from the call, and this is a frame from my PureRef board, which is like definitely very much minimized down. But I'm gathering all this words they're saying. I'm kind of making a word map. I gathered a ton of imagery off to the side. I have the brief down here. I'm pulling everything together. And eventually, you sort of connect it all together and you write some words to it, and a concept comes out of everything they've been saying. And what's great about this is all these little bits, I was like, okay, I need these concrete walls are something. That's the core of the concept. Like, that's where everything's going to live. And the way this is damaged in this thing, I want to kind of achieve that. And I like this, the way this map detailing is, and this wall stuff. These are all from sources probably many of you know. And then I have everything together and I start to write out a concept to it so that I'm constantly reminded, like, well, why am I even trying to figure out how to crack into this wall or whatever? Well, I'm trying to do it because I'm trying to capture a metaphor for the pressure and the drama of being in a race, So, okay, so I've got my concept and I've got my reason to go in here and figure this out, so I know I'm not just making a pretty picture for the sake of it. The client's going to like that. I feel good about really diving into this. And as I'm looking around, for these kind of assets, I'm like, well, they're going to have like a barrier around the racetrack. Like that's an existing model. And it honestly really wasn't. It wasn't something that I could find something with this exact damage. And then I thought, even if I did, like, what if that covers up the word wrong? Ugh, I don't want to be, beholden to that exact model. So, I started thinking, well, let me see what I can do in the volume builder in Cinema to try and create some of these things so I can really art direct exactly where I want all these cracks to be. So ultimately, once we had this concept and this thing's kind of suspended in space and you're floating around it, the drama's there, the lighting adds to it, all the detail, what we want to capture. I put together a motion test for the client, and I'll show that, and it just kind of will show what we tried to show them, so that here's this package you would have of all these interstitials and tracks that you could like play down when you're ready to with your client, and just get them excited about the package we were going to create for them in general. I'll let it play one more time because it's quick. Cool. So this can also be a little plug for Premium Beats. I just went in there and grabbed something silly that sounded, sporty, but I like the little violin loop in there. It felt right. So I wanted to give the client something to look at, like, what is this final thing that they're gonna get, and why, and how does this detail all hold up? So let's get into how I actually built it. We'll just do a render to get everything sort of cached in here. this was like still frame world. I eventually went in and animated to all these, as you saw, but I just worked in these still frames at first. And so you can see this is like exactly from the frame out there. And we'll just minimize this right now while we work on how that was detailed. So if I jump into this view is what you normally get, like the perspective view. And if you set up cameras, you get, that view takes over, that camera takes over. So what I always do is this defaults to like a, front or left camera. I always switch this to perspective as well. That way I can move around and explore and do everything I'm doing to this scene, but my camera view is maintained. And so you can see like this is actually flat and sitting at world 0. And then I just, with the take system down here, I sort of captured a couple of these different cameras. So you can see every time I click one, the camera is set up to pick a camera out. We're just picking different angles. So if I just go into the texture and I have a little shortcut where I've just basically did this command, connect that node to the output. So I've just like made that go into the main output just so we can see. That's how I was like lining up my cameras. I knew that I wanted like something close on this. You can't quite tell what this says. It picks back. You get this reveal. Same thing for like the track map. You can go in here. You can have, I'll explain some of these things a little bit, but that's how I got lined up on all that. Cool. So that explains why you see one object and these changing scenes. I try to, as much as possible, I try to pull what I can out of one scene, especially in a pitch mode where I just, I'm turning cameras around this rather than duplicating this whole setup and turning it like 8 times. That would be a little counterproductive. So I ended up with this ultimate broken up thing, textured and all that. So I have that. But I got it from this build section. So we'll go in here and we'll turn off this debris because we're not really like thinking about that right now. These were just like some Quixel models that I colorized to add like some asphalt down here and some broken up parts on the corner. So we'll turn those off as well. But they'll render, but we just don't need to see them right now. So yeah, so like I said, I think this started with a cube. And I was like, all right, what can I do to this cube to get all this drama in here? So I started with a volume builder, which is in here in this menu. You drop the volume builder and you put it inside a volume mesher. And I'll get into some settings specifically there. Since I'm kind of breaking this down, I'm not always going to show exactly where it came from, but I'll work backwards through what I have. So all these things that I ultimately shaped this block with are in this volume builder. And some of them are turned off, and I'll explain that in a minute. And then, I'll turn them on here. This is the equivalent of me like dragging this thing in here, but I'm just going to show it that way for speed. So we can see this cube. Like we'll start with this little corner thing here, and I just took a simple cube out of here. All these other shapes available to you, and I moved it in onto this corner, and I knew right away, like, okay, this thing's been like extracted. It's in a museum. The wall is so damaged it's no longer stable for the racetrack, but let's start showing how messed up it got over the years. So I put this cube into the volume builder here, and that's this one right here, and I set it to subtract, and there you go. Then you can move this around. I could set the depth of that damage. Maybe it's just on the corner a little bit, maybe it's the whole thing. And I'm just playing, like this is a great tool, and the speed this thing works at, Maxon makes it feel like play, So really, that's what I was doing. I wasn't stressed out that I couldn't find this model. I was like, I'm gonna go make my own, and like that already is empowering in a way that, I knew I could meet this deadline of this pitching time. But this is obviously a super boring cut. Like no concrete would ever break so smoothly like that. So this is where you can start adding in some fun detail. So if I underneath all these, you can see they all have something parented under. And what it is, if I go into linear, like a line mode, I've switched between this mode and that mode, and I'm using these shortcuts ND and NC to get there. So if I go into the line mode, you can see this cube has a ton of segments on the top, on the surfaces I was most going to need to stamp into here to create some detail. And this displacer that's on here is just a little bit of height, and I kept it intensity centered. I wanted upwards, positive and negative displacement, and then I bumped it in here with this blistered noise. You have all these other normal noises together. I was finding for this project, blistered noise created a cement pattern that really like looked very cool. And you can scale it up and down, and you can see when I turn this on, I'm getting these bumps, and I'm getting like this little cool stamp, you know, and I can change all the sizes of it. And if I go back to NC, like it was enough that looked okay. That's a rough texture that I'm looking for. So when I turn the volume builder back on and it cuts that away, yeah, now you can see this edge has like this interesting cut to it. It's not just this like lame solid cut that would never happen if something was broken off. Cool. So like already I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to work. This is better than anything spending 5 more hours looking for models, and like just let that go and focus full on this. So I use the same technique like 5 more times, cut different corners off here. If I have them selected, you can kind of see the ghosting of where they are. Same thing, boxes with displacers in there, just angled exactly where I needed them. And like down here on this one, it's more chunky and bigger because, you know, I took that specific cube and the scale on its global scale is a little bigger. Or maybe it's this one. I think it's like 65. Yeah, 61. See, the other ones are 10. And you can make it match that if you wanted. But, you know, I wanted something bigger on there. And just a note, too, like I have this in a volume builder with a pretty low voxel size, but you can go up to like 5 and get a lot of like speed back now because everything's so like quick, you know, and, you know, once, and then you can just keep working up fidelity like as you get there. You're like, all right, cool, that looks better. So I was done with cubes. I'm like, that's the great basic first shape. And then I started working, I'm like, well, I hate that little corner right there. That's annoying me. So I drug this platonic solid in, and you can see that's just I'm going to turn off these again. You can see that's just the equivalent of a platonic solid scaled down, and it has a displacer on it like the way the blocks do, and it gives it all that noise. And I mean, I did bump up segments to get it to have enough segments to displace. So cool. So then back in the mesher, undoing a little bit here. DNC. Here we go. It just gave me like that sweet little corner chunked off like that. And I was like, well, that's cool. Can I do that across the whole surface to get the rest of like the little chunks I wanted in? I was like, yeah. Oh, yeah, there we go. But then I was like, well, wait, I don't want to do by hand like all the cracks. That's not as procedural as I'd love it to be. Let's see what else we can do. And so the other thing you can drag into these, it doesn't have to be objects, doesn't have to be shapes. You can drag in fields. So like these kind of live up here, create fields and that. But I like to make like tools down this little strip here, so I brought this whole thing over there. So that's the other place you can find them. Or you can just kind of like type in what you want. Fields, oops, not that. Shader, yeah, they're all down the list down there. Like Control C, and then you can go from there. So I grabbed this thing, I threw it into the stack, and if I turn it on, you'll see, yeah, I mean, like, there we go. That sure didn't want to do that by hand, so using like procedural stuff, that gets way better. But I was like, oh, well, wait, you know, I mean, this starts out actually, I'm going to clear this. This starts out like this, you know, like this box. And again, I'll bump this up to like 3 so we get a little more feedback. It's like, oh, yeah, I don't really, this isn't helping, this isn't quick, and you wouldn't have this hard edge here. So then, you know, I mess with these settings. There's an object below. There's the entire thing like broken up. That's cool. It's not what we're looking for, but it's just also something cool that you can do. If I bump back to fidelity, I mean, look at all that. And it's pretty real time. I mean, once it calculates, it's great. So I turned on this in the shader field. I was like, okay, well, I do know it has, in the stack of the volume builder in the shader field, if I select it, I knew it had this box mode and this create controller thing. So instead of creating one and reusing it, I'm just going to use the one I had. There you get a little more control back at least. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I can kind of pull it to the side, like move this, like crack just to the edges over here where it's really broken up, and that'll be enough. And you know, it is, but it kept leaving this hard edge, and I was like, all right, this isn't right for this, but I'm gonna keep it in mind and use it on something else. And so cool. So then I looked at this whole thing and I was like, all right, well, I have to get some other cracks in there somehow. And so the way that I did that was with Redshift and displacement. I decided this was a great base and it's time to move on and go from there. And before I leave it, I just want to, this thing's been up top and it's huge. It's a key little detail. So let me turn it off and you can see everything breaks. It's not necessarily broken, it's just the way it's interpreted. So in general, this volume builder has two modes. It has fog and it has sign distance field. Sign distance field is great, but when you start getting low with this number at this scale, you know, like compared, this is the normal world scale. Like this is 200 units and this is pretty big. It was just going to be like a lot. I couldn't get the detail as much as I wanted. So that's when I switch over to the fog mode. And like these things work differently too. When you're in this mode, you get like this set of subtract, union, and intersect. And when you're in fog mode, you get a lot more, like almost like Photoshop style amounts of, not that many, but a lot more blend modes that can become really valuable, which is another reason I like to use it. So, but you can see when I turn this mesher on, it's like, it doesn't understand that density of that fog cloud. So I'd have to mess with this voxel range like up to here to get it. And I was like, I mean, I'd rather this works correctly first than to have to do this and then do this later and like after the fact. So the way that I worked with that was I picked up a tip from somewhere. I think it's one of the sources I'll show at the end. But down here you have these kind of like limiters. You can do some different things with all these, but fog curve just by itself, just at the top of the stack, which is all that this is. I think I just deleted the whole thing. That's not what we wanted to do. Boom, there we go. Okay, that at the top of the stack, you can see instantly this works again. I don't exactly know the logic of this. Like it is explained, I'm sure, somewhere. But when I found the tip, anytime I'm working in fog, I just work with that at the top and everything works great. So that's a little tip if you're having issue with fog builder, that can help. And then when you're in this mesher over here, it's like the last detail before we go and work with this thing and like all of its fidelity. So maybe you don't want like this high density mesh for your final. So there's a couple things you can do on the mesher itself before you like would take it from there. Even just changing this adaptive quality, for instance, to 0.1, now we have a model that might be a little more friendly in like a game engine or something like that, because we just reduced the polygons by, you know, probably millions just by breaking these all out. It needed more data here. It didn't need data here. That's what adaptive does. It puts the segments where you need data. So I ended up needing all the data because I was going to like subsurface divide into here. So I just thought, okay, I'll leave it there. But one thing that is cool, like is if I read, this is at 62, it's normally at 50. The reason I did that is because if you can see, if I go all the way up here to like 100, this actually becomes like a straight edge again. So maybe you do that and then you add roughness, or sorry, round edge in Redshift or something like that. So this little thing, like before you commit, you know, you have this sort of one last controller where you're pushing the volume in and out to get the kind of shaping that you wanted. And 62 was the sweet spot for me, not 692, 62. Yeah, great. So I took that whole thing, current state to object, command it. I got this duplicate of the whole thing. You know, now this is ready to work. You don't necessarily have to do this step. There's a certain level where I'm going into pitch mode. I don't know that I want to be so procedural. It wasn't like a test to see if I could. It was more about, I need this base. Let me get this out as quickly as possible. So now to get all this other roughness and damage to the front, we jump over into Redshift, and I'll show you how I got all that. So I made a material, put it on there, got it all set up and going, and I don't love this mode. You know what, it's fine. I don't love when this thing's like in the same window, but it's not a big deal. Undock, just make more room. Okay, cool. So I have this texture. It's broken up into a couple pieces. Let's let this re-render right here. And one thing I like to do when I'm in this mode is I build things with triplanar, like the base for this whole thing, and that way I can map the main like graphic on here, this high speed graphic. I actually map this all on like a flat projection so that like you can see here, this is like a way that was kind of prior to the now stacking things that you can do in 2023, which are awesome. But if I switch over here to this mode, I can like move high speed around wherever I want. And, you know, that's because it's flat projected. But because I'm using triplanar mappings here, which I'll get into in a little, this concrete is maintained because it's like not, and also my procedural destruction, but the map of the text can be moved around wherever. So that's kind of the setup I used for this. I kind of knew there would only be one text piece at a time. It's quick and dirty. It was easier than dealing with the UVs, because let me show you what they look like. This is what output when I saved the thing as an object. It did a weird spherical projection. It's like, I know I could UV project this, but I don't want to. I'm in pitch mode and I got to move quick, you know. So that's the reason that I didn't really fully go into all that. So let me just make sure this is at the right place. It is. Cool. So it didn't really matter because I had. Let this go here. Cool. I had, you know, I knew, okay, I want to like triplanar project this concrete so that lives independently of the projection of the whole texture. And then I want this red paint kind of more shiny thing to come through my text. And then I want this procedural, Maxon procedural noise, which is in a 3D space and can be moved around procedurally as well. And I'll show that to kind of be on top and cut through this text and all that. So I'll do a little trick here just for a little speed. So in Redshift, if you go to this globals, this is a way hidden thing that's super useful. I don't want to disable or turn off my displacement while I'm showing you all these things, but I want it to render faster than when displacement is on. So this little checkbox at the bottom of globals, tessellation and displacement, this undoes everything that you do in these Redshift tags. Now I'm going to close these camera ones because that's not really what we're talking about. In these Redshift tags in here, even with all this checked on, this is undone by switching this box on. And that is evident here. You can see I don't have my displacement anymore, but I still have my mass and everything all kind of reacting. I mean, actually now if I just jump over in this and move this around, like it's way zippier, and like we can go in and check like, okay, yeah, did I get the top projected? Yeah, it's cool. The triplanar mapping is properly picking up. Even though it looks stretched here, it's working in there. So you can like check things, and then you can get back to displacement at the end when you're ready to do that. So so these triplanar textures, I won't go a ton of detail other than to just say just to sort of show you what they are. So this just like came from Quixel, all from different places. I like the way that looked weathered. I ran it through a Redshift. I ran it through a triplanar, so it would adhere to everything I just showed, and it through a color correct, so it was kind of more of a white texture. And ran that into the diffuse layer of this concrete texture. And then that is all running into a material blender. So we'll get to the material blender in a second, but if we look at that, we've got this concrete. That looks lovely. Cool. Then this is going to be all painted red for a minute. I knew I wanted a concrete version that took some of these other bumps over here, like this normal map that I have going on. You know, these little divots and things. There's actually other line data in there, as you can see. And there's just some other random little things that dirted up the surface for me and made the bump on the concrete. And I piped that into this red paint so it felt like it was on the same cracks and crevices of this surface. Piped that into the layer color of this material blender. So the concrete's in the base, this red paint waiting to be masked out by the blend colors in the base. We're good there. I brought in this texture that I made in Photoshop, and it has alpha and the whole thing. I split out its alpha and I ran that over, and you get, I think I've shown before, you get this result. So that's waiting to punch through something. So I have this Redshift color layer, and I'm not going to go into the detail of where all these are exactly, but the color on the top is a cue to where you can find them over here. And so the way this works is just like, yeah, it's inputting, it has a base, which is this file, and then it's going to input a different thing and set it to multiply and mask from that. And so what I'm masking is this concrete procedural noise from that's weird, my output thing stopped working. Oh, all right, that's why, because I was doing the wrong thing. Okay, cool. So this is procedural noise from Maxon. This is all the noise that's available to you in like the displacer I was showing. I was using like blister to turbulence in the displacer. In this case, I was using turbulence. And I've done some settings down here, like some cycles to get it, you know, you can have it be more or less contrasted. And I'm also showing you here, you can animate this on and off. So it could be completely no damage, and then it animates on and gets super damaged. That is a way to like think about the tools that you're using here. So I've taken that noise, which actually that's the one I will show because I colorized it for me. It's normally in this yellow section, and it looks like that to start. So that mine's green because I just decided I need to know this is a main node. So the one place I pipe it is here into this ramp, which I have slotted way hard over here, and that gives you this very hard black and white image. So that's going up into this top layer color that I was talking about, and it's cutting away at the same place that displacement is going to happen, away from the high speed or whatever text is there. So that'll be important in a minute. I'll show you. The other way that I'm piping it, though, you can pipe this into multiple places, is down into this lower ramp where I've changed the ramp like settings and qualities. So, here you can see it's piping, it's changing it's the same texture that's cutting away the mask on the other thing, but it's got this white and black output, because displacement is looking for white and black. It's looking for white to push things up. It's looking for black to push things down. It's looking for gray to do nothing to it. It was a little bit of a risk to use black to push things up, but I just thought it would like give volume to the overall surface. You could make this gray, and then really it would only be pushing one way or the other. And then the really interesting thing here is how displacement itself works. So that's not what I wanted to do. So displacement has this texture goes into it, and it has a scale here. Now in this case I used -1, and this is where it's important to me to undo this tessellation and displacement, because everything I'm talking about won't show up otherwise. So normally this starts at 1, and so that's going to do the opposite thing. That pushes out the cracks and pushes back the wall. So I usually don't change this number from 1. Sometimes I make it less than 1, but I think of this number as like a multiplier. And I'm going to put up a link at the end of a place where I learned that technique. And I think if everybody watches that, there's a lot of mystique around how these things really work. And I think they're really not that terrible, and they're pretty powerful. So that's the first part of it. And the second part of getting displacement to work is right, and I think I said, but the negative makes it kind of act the other way. The other way I could have done that is just inverted this ramp, but I've done what I've done. Here we are. So cool. So then if you don't already have it on there, you got to go in here, you got to go to render tags, and you got to go to this Redshift object. In the Redshift object, this will all be off by default, which was back to where we were. Like this particular thing has no displacement. You turn on this override, you turn on tessellation override, and you turn on displacement. The tessellation is, if you remember, it's going to take whatever this geo is, and it's going to look and find anything less than it's sort of like a unit thing. So anything less than 3 units, maybe it's a size thing. It's really trial and error. On this mesh that's not dense enough, it's going to add geo into it. So I mean, this is a pretty dense mesh. This starts at 4. I'm not even sure that me going down to 3 did anything. I just knew that I wanted to put some stuff on the surface, so I needed the density just in case. But you sort of lower this at your own risk. If you get down to like the 1s or 2s, I've seen like some very big it can definitely crash things, and that's why Maxon and Redshift have wisely put it up at 4, so you don't find yourself in that loop. But these can be adjusted on like low poly things. It can really help at render time. You get more subdivision. And then the other key thing to turn on here to actually get displacement is this little guy. So you can see, like, if you don't have that checked, again, no displacement. And you can see when you start, this starts at 1 and this starts at 1. And you almost can't see probably, but there's very little displacement in there, hardly any. And so think of these things rather than like messing with this. This is just sort of like negative or positive to me. But think of these things on the tag in geometry down here, these displacement settings, as your main base for where you're going to do this setting. So the maximum displacement is like in world units how much displacement you're going to be allowed. So it's weird because you set it and it's still not a very deep displacement kind of thing, and that's because displacement scale, that's a power, right? So I want it displaced 4 world units to the power of 40. All of a sudden, boom, we got this huge density right here. So, I mean, yeah, I can displace 1 world unit to the power of 40 and get like, now it's too much crevices and too much density and stuff. So then I'd bring this back to like the power of 10. So that's a great way to think about it. And I am paraphrasing a little bit from a place that I'll throw up at the end. So, consider that that's the way these work together, and they give you these different results, and you can get more control back on them. Because that's one of the issues I always had. I couldn't get the control. Like, if you wanted to be twice as much displacement, you would just bump up the unit allowance, and you'd bump up the power allowance. You're going to see this is going to get crazy now, like giant holes, and it kind of pulls the edge along a little bit. That just has to do with the fineness of my masking. You can like have that or not. I thought it was cool that it looked like some paint was on there so long that it like bled into the surface, so I left it. But I mean, this is a much better way to understand displacement in general and get you a look that you can control. It doesn't always have, a lot of people leave this at 1 and then they change this, and like nobody's wrong. It's just, this is the way that I've found is the most easiest to understand it. And now this is like a multiplier, so it's a little tricky to see, but if I set this to like -5, you should get more like crunchiness in this. It's a little more dense and deep. So now you're like multiplying the effect with the settings not changing the depth at all. That's the way to think about displacement. Cool. And so the value of all of this, right? I've got it all set up, and I'm like, and the client's like, yeah, this is great, but like, what the hell does that say? I mean, does it say, I can't tell. And you're like, oh, whoa, just everything's fine. We're going to go right here. This thing has movement. We've got this procedural setup. And you're just like, I'm going to go -5. And I'm pushed this whole thing over, and they're like, oh, it's a speed, like, great. Oh my God, okay, yeah, we can definitely take this to the top and share now. Obviously, you can like change the value of this. Like if it's too crazy, too much is coming through, you can like slim down the damage. Now we just have these like little tiny little pieces right here. So it's totally controllable. It's totally procedural. You can change these to different types of noises, and get a whole, like that's a whole different look effect. That looks like a different kind of cracked up wall, and you might want to change some of your other settings based on that. And this looks like a different kind of cracked up wall with extra little patterns in here. So, once you get it in, you can just play. Like we have these tools, we have these easy procedural setups. That's what Maxon's allowing us to do, and it really does. It does feel like play. Cool. So I'll leave that alone. There's obviously always more to talk about, but we don't need to get into the other textures. I just did different masking to get those pieces that like strip on and highlight the track. I'd use similar techniques to get this crack to be right around here on the track and have that edge cut right off on the fast track. But because I had full control of what those looked like, it's not like I was resculpting that every time. That would take forever. I had 2 days to do this pitch, so had to do it like quick and dirty with this procedural setup. So cool. And I'll show the split part that I was in the beginning of the project. We don't need that rendering, just to show like how I use the volume builder further in that. What I'm talking about is this moment at the end where the piece cracks open. So to get that, I took the same piece that we had been working with, and I just took it and put it inside of a volume builder, inside of a mesher builder. So this is the cube. This is the broken cube that we decided like that's the look of the base. Laid that here. Put everything else that I cut through in an object. Drag that in. You can have things kind of living inside of an object, and then it'll notice everything inside of it. Set that to subtract. Got the fog layer up for stability. Didn't actually need it on this one, but I still, like I said, I like it there. And then just turning these off. I just did the same thing. Simple cube, simple displacer. So it's more interesting, I think, now that you can see the pieces. The cube is what's cutting that away. You add the displacer. Now it's got a chunky edge. you put the bend deformer in it, so you get a little bit of natural crack movement, and yeah, and then in the final, I just did a couple other things to it, like I used a taper and cracked it open with a taper, so it started through the bottom small and the top wide, and then I just cut to this moment where the two smashed apart, so that like, you know, tricking the eye. And I would have amped up this value like on the final, but it, you know, it's just something to get the client like excited that this is what you're going to give them. So cool. So let's jump into this other project. Oh, this one doesn't want to go away. There we go. See how much time we have here. Yeah, I think it's fine. I'll talk about this one quicker. So this was another project I did. Similar principles, but now we're art directing construction. We're art directing building back up. There's destructive elements to this, but essentially it's a sculpture from the bottom up. So ultimately, I had a couple of these models laying around, and I had an idea to kind of put them together in this zany, abstract piece. I had like some Quixel models, some CG Trader stuff, some arms that I cut off of models at 3D Scans, which is a free source. Highly recommend checking that out. And like a cube that I thought would sit in the middle, and I could sculpt to look like these things. And you know, even in my experimental work, I'm like, well, and you know, how abstract should it be? Maybe there's a little bit of a purpose. So I mean, in this case, I like made it look like an athletic shoe kind of thing, you know, so that like it appeals to something. There's a little bit of a focus and some light on it or whatever. And then the last detail was like, how do I get all these like little cracks and crevices in control, and then make the whole thing felt like it was put in a mold and merged back together. I'm like, well, that sounds like some volume builder and fields talks. So same thing. And my pure ref board for this was more just like collection to prove that to myself that this is a real world thing, you know, and then look at those details and some digital versions of it. Also to like track my progress, like my blocking as I go. So it's a great little tool to keep the concept focused as you go. All right, so we're gonna close that one up, and we're in here now. This might be thinking about volumes. Let's see. No, it's good. Okay, cool. So this is the final piece, and this is kind of like where the final quality of the count. This is like a slightly optimized one just to show. The real one was like a little more dense. But so yeah, you can see how it all meshes together, and how it has these like little details, these little edges, like, so it's believable that this came out of the same cast. And I started up here. And I do kind of like use this system quite a bit, like build, volume, and like final sculpture, right? So in the build, I'm actually like doing that. This is where the blocking happened. I didn't really know what the final sculpture was. I just knew that me and my friend, like EJ calls these guys Bobs, and I'm like, we're gonna make this together. It's gonna be great. I think this thing being a Bob is a great thing to call him. I call him that myself too in my head. But I needed him there because I wanted the scale of everything to work like as I went. You know, can that shoe fit on him? I actually tested it. It could. And because I'm freaking neurotic like that sometimes. And so, yeah, then I really did. I started with these Quixel things, and I was like, that's cool. I like that base. And I was like, this cube, I'm going to have to work on him. He's got to look like that. We'll come back to him. These cement fillers made things kind of like fill up. Like they added to the believability that like, this thing was getting fused, and there were all these like little deformities in the cracks and crevices. I worked on this concrete block as an interesting way to work up to this shoe that everything was going to focus up to. Supported it with these weights and threw this kettlebell in and these arms. And you know, in these arms, I just have like this display tag on it. It's in here, in tags, in render, in display, and I just have that set to lines. So that I could see, you know, I'm going to use this to cut that arm away, but I needed to see the edging of it. So that's what that is all about. So I took all these things, blocked them all together, and sort of just actually hid this sculpture. The top of the shoe like wasn't taking the volumes very well, so that just always kind of lives out there. Cool. Then I'm in volume mode, and I'm like, what do I need to build here? So we'll just look at like this kettlebell. Like I knew that I needed a volume to get the. But I'm still referencing these stuff. Even though I have them off, I'm still referencing these final things. So I knew that in here in the kettlebell, I have this object and I have this 20-pound object, and I want to set it inside of of that volume. So I drug these up, and in this case, they become a link because they're not children, right? You can work with these isolated of the objects. They don't have to be in here under as a child. They can stay in this blocking grouping. So I drug the kettlebell in, I drug the 20 LB in, the 20 pounds, and it defaults to union, which gives you like this effect, which could be cool. It's not what I was looking for here because kettlebells have like a subtracted surface thing usually with these numbers, and cool. Then I got that. I got this down to a number that was good, knowing this would get smooth further, and really just kind of worked that way like all through. I'm going to skip the shoe, but like here's the arm at the top. Oh, and one thing to mention, like before I left finished volume thing, is I put this cache layer up here, and that just lives right here, and you throw it up and then you say cache. You can, I think it only caches to the thing, but what that did was just, this is a much less processor heavy thing for Cinema to work with now because it's under this cache thing. It's only looking at this. It's not looking at the stuff and everything else. It's just looking at the new thing it formed. So then I did that on all of these other objects on the arm, anything that needed special attention, like the cubes to cut this off. And I would have like the cement blocks show through, these cinder blocks show through to make sure that that was all looking good. Like anything that I needed to turn on a per object level, I would like use these awesome radio button things here, and I would just be like, yep, that's looking right, one piece at a time. Then I got to the center cube, and I was like, okay, this thing just looks like a cube. So I was like, well, I know you can use fields to do all this cutaway stuff too. So let's just get rid of everything we're not looking at here. To make this model look a little more like these guys. So that was the challenge there. I was like, okay. So it starts off, it doesn't have any of these on it. It's just a cube. But I was just trying to show you can also use linear fields. So again, I'm using this menu that's up in the top here, and you can put any of these in. And in this case, I used a linear field. Same way I was cutting off the corner of the first thing with a block. Here I'm doing it with a linear field. So that works just like any other field would be. This is and what I would do is I would just turn the stoplight on of each item, kind of moving in and out. That's how you get this crack in there. At the bottom, I put this random field that gave it all this detailing. Again, this is another type of field that's down in here, and it has all the other surfaces, so you can get all these other things. You can try, once you set this up, you can try everything out and get what you want. You literally are art directing what you want. This was to make room for these weights that were coming out. That's essentially why I was cracking there. And I mean, I'll show you, like if I turn all these on at once, it looks insane, but that's just the end product. That's not what I was doing. I was like making one, focused on that edge, and okay, yeah, that's exactly what I want to cut off on the bottom there. Add it to the stack, like add it over to this stack, set it to multiply, and worked all the way up through these. So even though that's overwhelming, just one piece at a time, you'll get there. And then I threw this fog smooth on just to give it a little kind of like cleanliness at the end. And I think, oh yeah, and then I cached the whole thing so it was a little easier. Then the final thing was take all of these and I put it in this like one mega sculpture, which let's see here. So the cool thing you can do with these, you can stack these up, right? So this volume builder is taking these finished volume meshers as if they're like objects. They're set to union. Anything else that was remaining, like the kettlebells, all of that, that's all brought into here, and that's used as objects as well. That's the mega sculpture. Everything's formed together on this edge, and then you can start doing things like dilating and eroding the sort of shape. I use like super subtle settings in here, so you almost can't even see what that one does. But this final smooth on the top of it, it's just kind of calculating down here quicker because I cached everything. But that's it, that really works. You get this final like smoothed in like fill that you don't have to sculpt and that you could change on the fly. So you take all that and you save it all out as a the same thing I did on the other one, like right click, current state to object, Maybe I shouldn't have done it because that's a long time waiting. That wasn't too bad actually. Yeah, and then you got the geo from that. You pull it down, and then the last thing I'll try to show quickly is you get this major sculpture. There's like one level of final things that I wanted to do to it, right? Like I wanted to sculpt a different one kind of concrete for certain areas, like around all this damage, and one kind of area concrete on this smooth stuff. So that's where Redshift comes into play. Like on what I'm calling the regular concrete texture, I just have this like pretty simple normal map on it. It's generally smooth, but still concrete-like. And then on this other one, again, using like a material blender, I put all these extra dense things, like really damaged-looking things. And I just make them come through in this white and black. And the way I made those come through is I painted it with these fields, essentially. So you can go into vertex color tag, which these live here, tags, other, vertex color. And you can turn on fields, and when you turn on fields, you can drag whatever. And again, I just used circular fields and box fields, but you could drag in random fields, etc., whatever. And then, so yeah, that gives you something to pull into your blend color. And so everywhere that was white is getting damage. Everywhere that was black is getting like the smooth concrete. And that is just a quick little thing on that. So I definitely don't have time to show this last project, but just a quick sort of one final thing you can kind of do with these techniques. You could take a Quixel model or a model from anywhere. You could do some of that shader stuff that we were messing with in the beginning that shader field that wasn't quite right for that first barrier. But you could use it in this way. You could pipe in a noise shader with blister turbulence and global scale 623. Again, blister turbulence was working for concrete, so that's why I chose that. And you get this sort of representation of the shader, and so you can subtract that from the Quixel model in a volume builder and the fog curve for stability. And then I built this thing really quickly in MoGraph with just one piece of rebarb and made this structure, put them all together, and it equals this unique asset that you can then put into a bool and take the result of like this thing being meshed out and that. You get to maintain the texture from the Quixel model, but you get to cut through it and put something triplanar inside of that, and all of a sudden you've got this like wartime piece of debris that you created. And then just now flip this seed down here, you've got another piece to put in the scene and another piece, and ad nauseum you can make thousands. And like this isn't even really a high octave in here, 5. If it went up to 8, you get like some of these softer round things go away, and you get really like dense, more realism, so you can kind of stylize it to your looks. So, all right, so that was a little recap of what we went over. These are some amazing places to that I picked up some of the training, and there's lots of things on Maxon's YouTube channel and some things on Cineversity, specifically from Jonah Pills, EJ, and Noseman all have them. This Patreon that I follow, M. Sadab, I think he goes by _sub or _subframe. His tutorials in general are amazing. Some of the settings I got on the wall and the debris that was procedural came from him specifically, so highly recommend checking that out. Yiseon Kim on Colosso has a cool tutorial about the vertex color tags. So I kind of went through those quickly, but that's where I learned that technique, so that's a great place to really learn it. And the You and Me Academy YouTube page, ran by Theo Daly and Joe Lawrence, they have a really awesome Redshift tutorial specifically, and all kinds of stuff. But one specifically on Redshift was this one. That is where I learned how to talk about the displacement tag. And I think that they do a great job, probably even better. And maybe I've even made mistakes when I was doing it, but they really do a good job of breaking that down there. And everything on their page is really great too. So that was huge on this project. So cool. So yeah, I've been Andrew Hess. These are all the places you can find me. Contact me anytime about work or otherwise. And all my social spaces here. Yeah, that's it.
All right, Andrew. Great. All right, we have time for a couple questions. Carlos is still getting ready and getting his files together. So we'll get started with the live audience. We'll start here. Yeah, you.
Oh yeah, like in this crack. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I have that file. It might not be enough time to pull it up, but yeah, essentially, I took the two things that I showed. You get just by putting it through. Actually, I should repeat the question for the audience. How did I achieve this cracked wall down in the bottom here? Yeah, essentially, when I showed the piece where I put like a cube with displacement in the middle of it, bent it just to get this like interesting cut. Took those two pieces and sort of like saved them as two halves and put the texture back on it. And like, it's kind of tricky to catch, but like in the actual output, you can see that I do one where I'm animating that thing that breaks down through it, because you can cache animation into volume builders as well. So that's what's happening. I'm taking that same cube setup, I'm pushing it down through, and I have a taper on it, so it makes like a point, and then by the time it gets through the end, it kind of expands. And then right at this moment, I took those two pieces and just like reset their like nulls to the front here, and I just twist them, So I just like faked the look. It's not that it actually snapped and I put physics on it. Yeah, it's a fake, and then all this debris around here is just cloners with noise movement on it, and it sells it, enough. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're working with like a day or two, so you got to just like cut some corners, but still you don't want the client to think that. You want the outcome to be beautiful, and these are the tools that really quickly help us get there. So, yeah.
So I have a question for you. The depth, how do you get the color in the cracks?
Oh, like the way it's bleeding in here and stuff. So that's funny. It's actually like a bit of an error.
Yes.
But I was mentioning it actually, and I like how it sort of errored its way in there. And I can show you real quick, like if I bump this up, and let's go to, yep, it's in the right camera. So, and we'll zoom in here, like 100 on that, but we'll do fixed scaling just so we can like get up at one close up. Let's go 150. Let's get wild. So, okay, so we're kind of like looking at the way that's bleeding onto the edge in there, right? Okay, so the map that is connecting that is, like I said, this is the Maxon noise thing, which looks kind of soft on its own, like kind of like that. Then you push it through this ramp shader, and what's happening is just like if I take this edge and push it back a little bit, it's coming off of the wall a little, and so now when we go back into the main view, it should like do that less. See, so it's right. So and another art directable thing. Like I'm glad you brought it up because I didn't want to get in too much nitty gritty, so I missed the thing. But this little just slide in that, in addition to being able to just push this around wherever you want, so easy. You just can slide like how much crack do you want it in? Do you just want it to catch a little bit of the paint like in there? And it's because like the depth is saying to push it pretty intensely, so when it gets really near to the edge, it just grabs pieces and stretches them. It's like a mistake that for this looked like old paint bled in. Yeah, so it's a happy accident.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
All right, someone from the internet said, do you use your CG Access subscription a lot?
Oh, that's
they don't
funny.
Find themselves using it.
I haven't ever actually used that at all, CG Access subscription. No, I know that source, but I tend to find Quixel, because not just their 3D assets, like they have textures that are just concrete wall. I'm pretty sure those are ones I'm using. And a lot of stuff from the Grayscale kit, they have great things. And Polygon are my main go-tos. I have seen those CG Access things. They were kind of like a little, like they didn't have some of the quality, but I also didn't understand how to do displacement the same way. So I bet if I went back and used that, they would have the quality I was expecting,
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. We will wrap up for today with Andrew. We have one last presenter, so stay tuned. We're going to get started here in about the next 5 minutes, so stay tuned. And once again, if you haven't registered, make sure to check out 3dmotionshow.com. Enter your information. You're going to get your chance to win a Dell laptop or a SenseLab tablet next week. So stay tuned. We'll see you in 5 minutes with our last presenter, Carlos.